Greetings, my fellow Americans. Today I'm going to be talking about something called RICO, which is something I've referred to in other videos, and I really have kind of alluded to it, capped over it, talked about it, but I really haven't gone into depth as to why it's important. Now, you may think this is something that doesn't affect you at all. I'm just giving you a basic schooling today on what law is. But the truth is, this is the most critical aspect of why this is allowed to be going on. Not so much as something that's wrong with the Great Montana Conspiracy, but how the Great Montana Conspiracy could be fixed in a sweeping reform if actually someone took an effort to do so. And that's why this affects you today, because it's not only about, oh, we're hopelessly overrun by a corrupt government. The tools exist to fix the corrupt government. It just takes the people who are placed in higher positions of authority to actually do something about it. And today we're going to talk about that. As I mentioned, RICO stands for the Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act. It was instituted in 1970 by the federal Congress and signed into law by Richard Nixon. You can reference it in the United States Code as 18 U.S.C. Section 1961 et seq. It is a broad sweeping law that was designed originally to deal with mob activity, which racketeering, influenced, and corrupt organizations pretty much kind of leads that to the idea. However, it was written in such a way it wasn't going to cover just mobs and organized crime. In fact, one of the authors of the bill actually said, this law can't be applied. We can't just have a law that applies just to white collar and blue collar workers or whatever. We need a law that applies to everything and everyone. And this law was written with that at edge in mind. So it's not just the mob or whatever, the mafia or whoever you think might be covered under this aspect of the law by its title. It refers to any organization, any enterprise, as the law defines them, that violates the same standards that you would expect organized crime to do. The law requires that at least two acts of racketeering activity, which are extensively written in the law and have been amended since the original law was in place, it requires two acts of these crimes to be, and there's 35 crimes, within a 10-year period if they're related to an enterprise. So the idea here is it's more of a conspiracy aspect. In other words, it's a sequence of crimes. It's not just I'm taking a bribe, in 1982, and then I take another bribe in 1985. They're not individual crimes anymore. Now they are actually a criminal conspiracy, and that's what the Racketeering, Influence, and Corrupt Organizations Act is designed to address in primary part. The idea you have an organization or a principal chain of activity that can be prosecuted. And this breaks down in so many ways. Prosecutors can issue restraining orders or seize property to prevent it from being stolen, basically being shifted away while the prosecution is ongoing. It's considerably easier to prove because it's about a pattern of behavior versus the individual crimes. So if you have to prove the individual crimes, great. But if you can prove the allegations of crimes perpetuating over a period of time and a pattern evolves out of that, you can prosecute it. It's much easier and easier to pursue when you're dealing with a broader, masterpiece here of integrated parts than you are just the individual cog. It also permits both civil suit, which allows you to pursue triple damages, treble under law, but prosecution can also receive this as part of their prosecution. They can seek treble damages for the harm that's caused or the money that's stolen or whatever aspect of this crime is violated. The important part about RICO is the word enterprise, and I just talked about it. Enterprise includes any individual, partnership, corporation, association, or other legal entity, and any union or group of individuals associated in fact, although not a legal entity. That's the actual language of the law. You'll notice nowhere does it say government entity, but it does say or other legal entity. Any organization that is out there that is a legal entity, and any organization or group of people that's not a legal entity, so long as they are acting in concert, are considered an enterprise. Can you see how broad this is? This is everybody from the local Elks Club, all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. That's how broad this law could be if it's applied. But it takes the effort of the prosecutors, whether it be the Washington, D.C. Department of Corrections, or not Department of Corrections, sorry, the Washington prosecutor's office, or you're dealing with, individual states' prosecutors' offices. The idea is it allows them to chase down conspiracy patterns rather than pursue something that's actually a individual crime or a bunch of individual crimes. It allows to break down and actually deconstruct criminal organizations and structures. Now, of course, how does this apply to the Great Montana Conspiracy? That should be obvious, but let me spell it out. Every time the state dissolves someone's civil rights, they take money or receive money or whatever to influence a case. Every time they use their power to abuse their positions of authority or to gain, like in Kalispell, Montana, there's a very well known that the Kalispell Police Department is actually protecting the local drug community. They know where the drug houses are. They circle the block. The people in front of the houses will wave to the cops. I'm not kidding. This is how corrupt this place is. They claim, if you talk to a police officer, they claim they are keeping an eye on these places because they have this idea that somehow, if they need to serve a warrant, they need to know where to find these people. No, they're actually protecting and sheltering ongoing drug activity. And it's been an ongoing perpetual problem for decades. They hide it under the drug task force. They prosecute certain people, but leave the large infrastructure of drug activity in place and intact. And the rumor is because they're getting kickbacks. Now, I have no actual evidence of that. Obviously, I'm just reporting rumor. I can verify that I know where a couple of these houses are. In my time working with people trying to help them get sober, trying to help them get away from abuse control relationships, I have been around people who are circulating these houses, frequenting these houses. I pick people up. I try to get people away from there. I try to keep them away from there. And I have actually seen where I've seen people wave to the police cars that drive by. I have seen them and the officers wave back. They know each other. They're basically running a protection racket. I can actually tell you a story of one issue up in Columbia Falls. There was a gentleman who lived across the street from a drug house, and he was watching these people openly sell drugs in the front yard. He had school-age kids. So he goes across the street and tells them they need to stop selling drugs in his neighborhood. They laugh at him and they just keep doing it. So he's calling the police. They ignore him. Nothing ever happens. So finally he gets fed up. And by the way, I'm not justifying this act, and I'm not encouraging anyone to do this. He grabs a baseball bat, walks across the street when he sees an open drug sale going on, and basically tells them, you need to get out of this neighborhood, you need to stop this, go away. He gets arrested for assaulting his neighbor across the street, but nothing happens to the people doing the drugs. Why? Because the Columbia Falls Police Department is running a protection racket for the drug house. It's true in Columbia Falls, it's true in Kalispell. I don't have any direct knowledge of Whitefish, which is the other tri-city that's up in Flathead County here. I do know what goes on in Columbia Falls. I do know what goes on in Kalispell. So I would only assume it must go on in Whitefish because, as I said, tri-city. And it's all Flathead County, and it's all prosecuted under the same county banner. So, yeah, the idea being that any of these enterprises could be pursued and prosecuted because it's a collective issue. You don't have to prove that each individual bribe happened or that each individual act of collaborating with a criminal enterprise is ongoing. You only have to prove the pattern of behavior under the law. And that makes prosecuting under RICO so much easier because it shuts down the activity, not just the individual acts. It shuts down the enterprise. It shuts down the criminal organization, regardless of whether it's a mafia group or it's a government group, pretending and acting under the auspice of government and using that position to commit crimes and to be a criminal organization in and of itself. The acts under the law are extensive. And I could sit here and read the whole section, but I would lose you in about a minute and a half. It would probably take about 10 minutes to go down and read the entire list as it's written in the law. It is incredibly extensive. But just as a kind of a summary and oversight, The acts that are included under this law that can be considered a criminal part of the criminal conspiracy commit any two of the following: gambling, murder, kidnapping, extortion, arson, robbery, bribery, dealing in obscene matter, or dealing in controlled substances, bribery, counterfeiting, theft, embezzlement, fraud, obstruction of justice, slavery, racketeering, money laundering, commission of murder for hire, embezzlement of union funds, bankruptcy or securities fraud, drug trafficking, criminal copyright infringement, money laundering, acts of terrorism, financial gain from aiding aliens to enter the country, and on and on and on. That's most of them, but there's a whole bunch of subsidiaries of these individual crimes that actually break down into other areas. But you get the idea. That's how broad sweeping this is. There's also issues of how if these actions are used to deprive civil rights or civil liberties or the rights of individuals. You have slavery in there. That should be like a pretty obvious one. But the law also prevents anyone from using ill-gotten gains from these enterprises to invest. It prevents anyone from owning or operating or having any controlling interest in any enterprises that are engaged in these kinds of criminal activity. And it prevents and makes it a crime to utilize these methods or racketeering enterprises to conduct interstate or foreign commerce, which, and again, broad sweeping. Interstate commerce, ladies and gentlemen, is buying off eBay. In most cases, if you're going off buying off eBay using illicit funds, you've just violated RICO. Congratulations. The whole point is it's so broad reaching that anything, literally anything, can get brought under RICO. But they have to have the prosecutors have an interest in doing so. And of course, as I mentioned in my previous video, you don't have that in Montana because everyone in Montana who represents a federal position has been elevated from within the pre-existing problem. If you have chickens that are being killed by foxes, do you go to the foxes and ask them to appoint themselves to oversee the foxes? Of course not. You don't ask the criminals to oversee the criminals. That's an insane proposition. So why would you go to Montana to elevate Montana individuals to be the federal oversight agency of Montana? I mean, it makes absolutely no sense. And yet, this is what we have. We have a system to where you have the people, you have the state government, and you have the federal government. The people are being oppressed. The state government's doing it, and the federal government's permitting it because they're still just an extension of the state government. So you have that issue. But, I mean, this prosecution has been brought since the 1970s against so many organizations. Some successful, some not so successful. I mean, a couple of failed attempts, for instance. They made an attempt to go after the Hells Angels in 1979. They failed on a hung jury. The Oakland chapter, by the way, speaking of which, I don't want to refer to all Hells Angels chapters across the country, but a RICO action was brought against the Hells Angels Oakland chapter in 1979, and they took it to trial and failed on a hung jury. There was a civil action brought against Major League Baseball in 2001. It was into arbitration. They lost in arbitration and ruled in favor of Major League Baseball. So there have been some failed attempts. There have been some very successful attempts. And one of those I'd like to talk to you today is called Operation Court Broom. And it's from 1992 in Florida. Apparently what was going on in Florida in the late 80s up through early 1990s was that we had they had, I should say, a set of, or a handful of state judges who were taking bribes. And you hear about this all the time. A judge takes a bribe. 4 state judges, 1 retired judge, several attorneys, and at least 1 private investigator were all indicted under this operation. The federal government came in an 18-month investigation. The FBI did undercover stings, paid hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes with marked bills, so they could trace the bills and verify that these are the actual bills received from the sting. The bribes were made for the purposes of releasing confidential information, return of property to defendants, reduction of bail bonds, suppression of evidence, on and on. Appointment of special processors in the court system. It just basically they were accepting bribes quite liberally for various different things. Hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of bribes. And the idea being that this was a huge conspiracy run between the attorneys and at least 4 judges who were on the bench and one who had retired by the time the prosecution was brought. The grand jury brought down 106 indictments against 8 co-defendants in the case. Some were convicted, some were cleared, some were brought back afterwards, after the initial prosecution, on RICO conspiracy charges. And it's not so much about how successful or unsuccessful. Obviously, it was successful in some respects. Some of these people went to prison. Some of these people didn't. Some of these people were cleared. Some of these people were convicted. I've read some of the appeals. The appeals, every single one of the appeals failed. The ones that were convicted stayed convicted. It was a solid case against some of them. Some of it was pretty weak. Some of it was innuendo. The jury saw through that. Some of it I didn't understand how the jury actually could not have seen the evidence, but it is what it is. But the point being, this is a demonstration of how the federal government has the power to come in and fix corrupt state institutions. Now, a lot of people try to use the defense of the 11th Amendment. And the 11th Amendment to the United States Constitution provides for the sovereignty of the states, which means the federal government can't come in and tell the states how to run. They can't tell them who their governors are. They can't tell them how to make decisions. They can't come in and co-opt a court case decision. RICO bypasses that. RICO says because it's involving interstate or federal foreign commerce, or involves in any manner, shape, or form the violation of civil liberties in the process, these what have become federal crimes, they're basically saying no. This is not an issue protected. The states are not protected. State officials can be prosecuted. Operation Court Broom is a perfect example. The point here is it's not the results of the prosecution that are important. What's going on is that the federal government has the power with RICO to come in and actually fix the problems in Montana. But it requires the federal government to actually be interested in doing so. There has to be an effort and a motivation and an interest in justice to actually come in and do something. Operation Court Broom took down 5 judges, prosecuted them, put several of them in jail, in prison. It has the power to bypass the 11th Amendment. It gives sweeping powers to prosecute anyone, government or otherwise. But the greatest limitation is the willingness to act. It has to be enforced before it's any good. And the judiciary has to allow the prosecution to proceed once it's brought. As I mentioned before in my last podcast, you have these issues that the federal court appointees are all appointed from within Montana. Our current judge that sits over the Missoula bench, Dana Christensen, never held a judicial position before in his life before he was appointed to a lifetime position over this court, all because he was the only Montana candidate that they could find to take the position. How broken is that? You put somebody for a lifetime judicial position who's never had a judicial job in his life, and you give him a lifetime appointment to a federal court judge position. All because Montana wanted to have a Montanan in that office. And you can blame Baucus for that one. Senator Baucus was part of the Judicial Committee back in the day when he was actually in Max Baucus. He was actually part of the Judicial Committee in the Senate when this position became open. He's the one who recommended Christensen after all the other judges had been disqualified. No other Montana judge remained, and somehow Christensen beat out every other judge for the position. How do you do that if there's not some manipulation going on? I don't know the circumstances behind the scenes, but if you take a situation where you have 20 eligible judges and 1 attorney, and somehow the attorney is the one who gets the lifetime federal judicial appointment, something's broken. When those other 20 judges simply, the only disqualifying element is they're not from Montana. If that's your only disqualifying, how do you disqualify judges and allow an attorney with no judicial record to take the stand or to take the bench? How do you allow that? if there's not something fixed or rigged in the system. And then Dana Christensen simply advances the process of defending the elite and powerful in Montana and continues to allow the system to exist as it exists because he's part of the good old boy network. He's part of the problem. So even if there was an aggressive federal prosecutor in Montana who wanted to come down here and prosecute, would Dana Christensen even allow it? If Dana Christensen's job is to protect the powers that be and protect the good old boy network, would Dana Christensen even permit a prosecution against entrenched corruption in Montana? So you have to start the problem with the fact that we have no actual true federal representation in the state of Montana, which means you have to step in and have an extrajurisdictional order come down, have a judge appointed who's not loyal to Montana, have a prosecutor appointed who's not loyal to Montana to look into this, have FBI agents who are not loyal to Montana look into this. You have to start the investigation from outside the state, and you have to start the prosecution from outside the state, and you have to start the judicial process with a judicial officer who is from outside the state. And if you don't do that, then even if this law was empowered, if it was enacted, if somebody came in and tried to sweep it, it wouldn't matter. Because they're all about defending each other. So that's the question we have here today. Does RICO exist? Of course it does. So the power exists to fix this, but why hasn't it been used? Why has no prosecution been brought against the state of Montana? It's not because Montana is clean and innocent. No one's even looked into it. I've heard, keep in mind, I've heard all kinds of rumors about how it's being looked into. I've heard rumors about a Washington agent, a California agent. I've heard rumors about a Great Falls agent. Every time I reach out and try to find these agents supposedly investigating Kalispell or investigating Flathead County or investigating Montana in general, I run into a dead end. They don't exist. They're rumors. And I don't know who's starting the rumors. They're persistent. They keep showing up. The same people keep getting mentioned, or at least the same areas and same regions keep getting mentioned. Oh, there's an agent over in Seattle looking into it. Heard that from like 4 different people. I try to track them down. Can't track them down. They don't exist. Oh, there's someone in Great Falls. Heard that from 2 or 3 people. Went over, called the Great Falls office, tried to find out who was investigating. Nobody's investigating, or at least nobody's willing to admit to investigating. Mind you, I haven't heard this story since I first got wrapped up in this nonsense in 2003. I have heard one story after another about this agent or that agent looking into these issues, about pursuing a RICO prosecution in the state of Montana. It doesn't happen. It simply doesn't happen. We need to have a more vocal representation, which is why what I want to do is to put together a nonprofit that actually champions these issues and raises these issues. I mean, if we can have lobbyists from major corporations going and petitioning the congressman, why can't we have lobbyists petitioning the prosecutor's office and say, Attorney General, do something. FBI, do something. Go buy up press releases. Go buy up media time. Get interviews on national syndicated radio stations or television programs and actually get the message out there. But we need money to do that. Like it or not, if you don't have money, you don't have clout. You can't buy advertising. They don't give away free advertising. Any more than my podcast operates on anything more than an iPhone 8. Which, of course, leads us into the less charming aspects of these videos, where I have to ask for support. And as I've mentioned before, and I keep mentioning, I'm a very low-budget operation here. I'm just trying to get information out, the information I know, what I can come across, make it aware to you. And if you like what I'm doing, by all means, please support me. Come out and say, this needs to be fixed, that needs to be fixed, and this message needs to get more of a broadcast out there. We need to increase the quality. We need to increase the capacity to bring information into this. I'd love to be able to interview people, but I'm using an iPhone 8. If I use an iPhone 8, it comes with this little bitty box right about down here. Maybe the size of my thumb. Less than the size of my thumb. And you might be able to make out who it is. You may not be able to make it who it is. But it's not really an effective method to interview somebody. It's on a split screen. I don't have the ability to do a whole lot of editing because the editing software costs hundreds of dollars. I live on a fixed income. I'm disabled. I pretty much backed into this corner. I have published books, but I don't make money off the published books. I keep publishing them, keep hoping I'll break the glass ceiling, but I'm not individually wealthy. I'm just somebody who tried to stand up to a corrupt system and got thrown in prison for it. Under a false charge, under an idea that they could pursue this because nobody would stand up for me. So if you like what I'm saying and you want to support, by all means, there's information. There should be information attached to this video, how to contact my producer, Bill Russell, how to contact myself. Once again, if you are supervised or in custody, I cannot speak with you directly. Not that I don't want to. It's one of my conditions to be able to be out here and not in an actual cell, is that I can't communicate with people who are incarcerated or under supervision. In those instances, please contact my producer, Bill Russell. He will take care of forwarding any information you wish me to relay here. I'd love to be able to talk about other people's cases. Keep in mind, my job is not to just come out here or someone's defense. I will vet the case, I will look at the information, and I will make a decision whether it's a valid case to bring forward. So keep that in mind. If you've committed a crime and you're just trying to find an angle to try to get out from the crime you committed, please don't come to my program. But if you have a case where you've been abused by the government, if you've been abused by the criminal activity of an organized structure, that's whether it be a prosecutor's office, a judiciary, the local, health department is harassing your business because they want your space for something they want to do or something, whatever. You have problems with corruption in government and you want me to get the message out, please bring it to my attention. I'd love to be able to do individual case studies, and be able to come on here and talk about them. But I need you to provide me the information. I can go only so far on my own. I need your side. My producer wants me to bring in a whole bunch of stuff about other people's stories, but of course I'm limited in that I only have the press releases. I don't have the other side. I need the other side. I need the information from you. So by all means, submit your information to me. Any material donations, any financial donations, the information on how to do so should be attached to this video. If it's not, please go to monspiracy.podbean.com, which is the originating point of this video. The information will definitely be there. Or, more preferably, visit my YouTube channel. The Great Montana Conspiracy channel is there. The information is attached to each video. Like my videos, subscribe, spread the message. If 10 of you relate to your friends, and 10 of them relate to their friends, and 10 of them relate to their friends, we'll get the following we need. We just need you to help me back it. As always, if you're watching this video, please be safe, and whenever possible, please be free. Thank you.